Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the gathering. There are a couple things on your table I want to explain real quickly. First of all, there's a group of gift cards. We're going to do a little game with those later, so those can just stay put. And then there should be a set of papers. There's 3 different ones, and that is for a small group activity that we'll do a little while into tonight's session. And then if you need a certificate of attendance, the sign-in sheet is just straight out those middle doors to your right. If you would sign in, and then I'll do those certificates and you can pick them up on the way out this evening. Okay, so we're not quite ready to start. But we're going to do a couple things before our virtual audience tunes in. And Tamra, just a reminder that when our virtual audience, when we cue this group to do their small group, to cue our virtual audience to click on their Zoom link at that time, and then I'll hop on and do that with them. So you each received a copy of this book at your table, and Kim, thank you so much. Wave to everybody so they know who the amazing author is of this. So cool. So such a great book and a really nice gift, and she brought those for you guys tonight. Okay, on your table, we're not really game people around here, but we're going to play a game tonight. So you have gift cards on your table. There should be enough for everybody to have one. So pick if you have 4 people at your table, pick the 4 best gift cards on your thing. So you should each be holding one. Okay, so they're different amounts, they're different denominations. Some may be more interesting to you than others. So, but everybody needs to have one in their hand. Then we're going to play a very appropriate song. And while we're playing it, you're passing the gift cards around the table. Okay, so you're just going. And then when the song ends, whichever one is in your hand, that's the one that you're going home with. Okay? Makes sense? You guys are winning no matter what. Okay, everybody clear? So everybody has one in their hand. We're going to play a song that we can all relate to. You're going to start passing when the song goes around. And then when the song ends, that's the one you take home tonight. Okay? And by the way, these are this church that we're at tonight, Sarasota Christian, they did a donation drive, and so these are from them. They did gift cards for you guys so you can go grab dinner. Okay, so ready? Are we ready for our very appropriate theme song? Okay, go. All right, that's your gift. That's the one you're going home with. Okay, unless you can agreeably trade with somebody else at your table, but both parties have to be agreeable, okay? All right, I feel like you may have a question for me. Okay. We'll get started here. Yeah, who knows what that one is, right? Oh, okay. Welcome, everybody, to the gathering. So glad that you're here. We do have our in person audience, and then we have about 11 families that are tuning in virtually tonight. So, welcome to them as well. I want to start by introducing Sarah from NAMI. She's going to come up and share a little bit about their programs because we feel like some of our families could really benefit. One of the things that we want to do at the gathering is offer you really relevant training, but also make sure that your resource pool grows each time that you're with us. So she has some information to share that may be helpful to your family or somebody else that you know. So thanks so much for being with us.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for having me. I'm just curious, has anybody here heard of NAMI before? Yeah? Okay, cool. So NAMI is a national organization. It stands for the National Alliance on Mental Illness. It is the largest grassroots organization for mental illness, and we are your local chapter in Sarasota and Manatee counties. Historically, NAMI has is an organization that is run by people who have lived experience either with mental health challenges or have a loved one who experiences mental health challenges. So we have programs that serve both family members and also programs that are for the individual with the mental health challenge. Mine specifically, as a family navigator, works with families who have children under the age of 25 experiencing mental health challenges. And we offer that peer support because everyone here has lived experience. So, part of my lived experience is as a mother of a child who has had challenges and familiar with navigating the system, finding resources, learning skills that have helped my family. And now I use those skills with additional training to be able to support other families who are in the process of finding what can help them. So I have some paperwork up front. As you signed in, you might have seen a few brochures and handouts, but that program is specifically called Family Navigation. So, and it describes on the back that what that encompasses, assisting the families finding those resources, offering support and connection. In addition, since we began that program in 2020, we learned that we can always benefit from more supports for our youth. So we actually created a youth program called Youth Move Suncoast. Youth Move stands for Motivating Others Through Voices of Experience. It's also a national youth-led organization, and we have a local chapter under our NAMI that offers leadership opportunities for youth 14 to 20, actually up to 29, because a lot of them are leaders when they're that age. But so they offer direct peer support with my family navigation program to anyone who is under 25. I'm not making this more confusing. But they have a lot of just community get-togethers as well. Some of the activities that they do are like mindfulness. They've done painting. They've done pottery making and things like that, and all under the social emotional wellness messaging that comes with that activity, and just building community, kind of like what you guys are doing tonight. You know, getting together with peers, people who understand, have shared that lived experience, who can relate, and being able to connect and have those safe spaces to talk. So that's a little bit about them. And this little handout here has their social media and their website information also up at the sign-in if you wanted to just pick that up. And I also left my business card up there and a few other events that we have going on coming up. So have any questions? That's about all I've got. But feel free to look us up on our website. It's namisarasotamanatee.org. And there's lots of information, whether you're a family member and you're interested in learning more about how to help your loved one, or if you're interested in connecting to a group with other families, or if you're looking for supports for your child. So we're here. Oh, thank you. Everything is free. The best part, right? It's at no cost to the community. So yes, everything, we have lots and lots of different programs, and there's not enough time. So definitely feel free to check out our website and let me know if you have any questions. Nice. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I really enjoyed talking with Sarah. We spent quite a while on the phone talking about all their different programs. And I know with a lot of our kiddos, especially when they get to like the teen years, they're resistant to counseling or they don't want to talk to somebody. But she had shared with me, I think that you had a lot of success because they're really talking to each other. It's like going to a group with other, like a peer group. And so that's been a really successful way to get some kids some services they need and for them to be a little bit more cooperative with that process. So thanks so much for being here tonight. Okay, a couple of announcements before we get into our training this evening. First of all, I want to let you know that this is our last month for now at this facility. So those of you that are here in person or used to coming in person, the next 2 months, so June and July, we're going to be back at Oasis Church, which we've been there before. And so you'll see that on the sign up and in the email, but just want you to know, wouldn't want you to drive all the way here and then realize we're somewhere else. So June and July is at Oasis. we are currently looking for a church or other facility where children, there would be classroom space for children that would be like right off of I-75. Any of the exits really between like Clark and 64 would actually be okay, because we know we have people coming from south, we have people coming from north, and so we figure if we're right off the interstate, that's convenient for most people to hop on the interstate and just be right there. So if you have any connections to churches or other facilities that would be conducive to this sort of event, please let me know. But at least for the next 2 months, we have a great home at Oasis. Another thing I want to let you know is those of you that are tuning in virtually tonight, when Tamra's going to open up in a minute with her training. She's going to talk for a little while, and then we're going to break out into some small group discussions for about 15 minutes or so. And so when that happens, she will cue our online audience to click the Zoom link that was sent to them earlier today so that they can still participate in that discussion time. And then the last thing I want to let you know is just you're at the Gathering, which is a monthly training for foster and adoptive families. All of our services are also available to relative and non-relative caregivers, and we feel like that audience a lot of times is underserved, and the need for training is growing for them. If it's a grandma who got a kiddo unexpectedly compared to a foster parent who signed up for this, right? And so we want to make sure that as you're linking arms with people in the community, you realize that all of the programs that we offer are for foster and adoptive families, but also for relative and non-relative caregivers. And so in addition to the Gathering, we do host a monthly ladies' night out, and everything that I'm going to tell you about is on our website, and we keep our calendar updated, so you don't have to remember all of this. But ladies, we would love to see you. We meet at a different restaurant the first Friday of each month, and we alternate between Sarasota and Bradenton. And so you can just come, enjoy dinner, again, network with people, some other mamas who get it, and honestly, some mamas who are really well resourced. And so as you encounter problems or struggles, you're going to be sitting around a table with other people who really get that and can point you in the right direction. We also do meal delivery. So if you get a new kiddo or you have some sickness in your family, you can always reach out. We can bring you a meal. You can request home improvement projects. We have an amazing team of volunteers who are skilled in a variety of areas. And so if you have a kiddo that you're moving in and you need a room painted or a crib put together or something like that, we love to be able to help with those. We also do one-time financial assistance. And so, sometimes we hear about families who they get a sibling group of 3 and the case hasn't been adjudicated and the stipend hasn't kicked in and they have to start childcare tomorrow or whatever. And so we like to be able to help stand in the gap with families when there are those unexpected financial expenses, especially if it's something where the funds that you should be receiving through the system haven't quite kicked in yet. So those are a few other things that we do. But I'm going to go ahead and introduce Tamra and have her come on up. She is with the Florida Center and doing amazing work there. And you're going to talk a lot about the brain, which we know is such an important piece of the kiddos that we're parenting. So thanks for being here with us tonight. We're really excited to hear from you.
Hi there, everyone. There's some faces I recognize. So my name is Tamra Cajo, and I'm with the Florida Center. Who knows the Florida Center? Good, very good. Well, I'm just going to explain about the FASD clinic. How many of you know about the FASD clinic? We got a couple of them. Okay, so the FASD clinic is, I'm just going to kind of explain this before I get into the presentation, but I want to make sure you guys know, because if any of your kids qualify for this program, do it. It's the best program ever. It is for any child who's been exposed to alcohol in utero or very high suspicion of alcohol in utero. And what you get with the evaluation, which is free, is a full 2-day evaluation with a neuropsychologist, a speech-language pathologist, an occupational therapist, and a mental health therapist. And what I love about the evaluations is it just gives you an opportunity to take a step back, to assess what is going on, to be able to go a step further. So it's kind of like, I always think about, when we're dealing with all these big behaviors, there's a lot of times it becomes really reactive because that's what you're doing. and this is an opportunity to kind of take a step back. However, I know I'm imagining a lot of you guys may not know about the alcohol. And I would always encourage you to kind of do some research anytime anyone calls me, because I know a lot of kids that have been using drugs are likely using alcohol at the same time. I would definitely go back and look at all of your old paperwork to see if you see anything about alcohol, because if they qualify, just do it. And if they're highly suspicious that they might have had alcohol, give me a call. But outside of that, we have other services that are also free. We have a support group on Wednesday mornings from 9 to 10:30. That we don't need the confirmed alcohol exposure. We just look at anyone who's raising a child who's been substance exposed. It's wonderful. We're serving the state, so there's people from all over who are just wonderful, who really get it just like here. So it just can provide additional supports. And the other thing that we're offering that's free also to you guys is on Fridays, we have, because not only are you dealing with a lot of kids who've dealt with trauma, you oftentimes have the additional trauma of dealing with school. So we have a school advocacy meeting that's the first and third Friday of every month, and we're working with a school advocate. And really the whole purpose of this group is just to help you guys understand, really understand, like, what are my rights going to a school, going to an IEP meeting? How do I read an IEP? How do I read a 504? How do I ask for what I need for my child? So it's not only are we having somebody who's leading it who knows her stuff, but we're also having other caregivers who are there who are learning about school advocacy and who can join you in these meetings so that you're not alone, because school can be really a stress. We also have the other weeks, we have special presentations similar to this. This is all through Zoom. And we have a legislative advocacy group, because I think the problem of kids that are been exposed to alcohol and potentially also drugs are the same thing. Where do they fit in? No one believes about the diagnosis. And so a lot of what we're doing is trying to get the word out with legislation and getting more funding out there, because, and I always feel like we're stronger together than separately, and we have some amazing advocates. Our previous CEO is the one who got our FASD clinic, and it's the only clinic in the state of Florida, and she's an amazing advocate. So if you want to kind of fight for these rights, you're welcome to join as well. I will, if you want any information, it's not all on the website, but you can always touch base with Jody, and she can get in touch with me, or I also have my business card, so you can get in touch with me later. But definitely, if you need to get involved with the program, I love our program. Okay, I think I talked so much. So today, what we're going to be talking about is the brain and behaviors. What is the connection? Next slide. So just once again, I'll just introduce myself again. My name is Tamra Cajo. I'm the director of the FASD clinic, and I've been in the field for many years, now almost 20 years. But I would say it wasn't until I got involved into this job. I thought I knew trauma until I started working with these children who have been exposed to both substances and trauma, and that I just started to see these individuals with such a different lens. And now it's like my mission that I need to share it with others, because it's not even just looking at those children. I think about even us, like, how do we start looking at each other through a brain-based lens? So, but I've worked with families in every single way. I've worked in crisis, I've worked in the homes, I've worked in the schools, I've worked in preschools. Name it, you've done it. I've done it. And I've been trained in a lot of different modalities, specifically working with children who have been exposed to substances and trauma. Next slide. We have lots of services. I'm probably not going to get into it. You can look on the website, but we have developmental therapies, mental health, our clinic, the list can go on and on. Next slide. I'd rather just get right into this. So with the training, all I have to say is be kind to yourself and do whatever your body needs to do in order to focus on this training. Just keep in mind you probably have had a busy day. You might be exhausted. You're also multitasking with a baby. You're doing all of this. So if you need to stand up, you need to walk around, you need to leave and walk back, do whatever your body needs in order to focus. And it's okay. And I say this because, you know, all of us learn differently. Some people need to talk, some people just need to listen. And so I just want you to respect whatever you need to do in order to focus. Next slide. So what we're going to go over is really, I'm just going to kind of go over the definition of FASD just so you know, looking at primary characteristics of FASD, but it will apply, I know I talked to Jody before, this will apply to all of you guys. I know you're seeing a lot of FASDs words there and you're like, well, my child doesn't have FASD, this doesn't apply. I promise you it's going to apply to all. And then really looking at appropriate combinations. Next slide. So what is FASD, fetal alcohol spectrum disorders? So fetal, it's what happens obviously in utero. It's changes in normal development in utero. There's a teratogen of alcohol which causes changes, cell changes and damage. There's a spectrum. So similar to autism, it's a whole spectrum where it can go from mild to moderate to severe. So not every individual looks the same. And it's a disorder that can impact you for the rest of your life. And it really combines both, there's the physical characteristics and there's also the behavioral, mental, and learning challenges that can be associated with the disability. So it's not, sometimes people know about FASD. If you do know something about FASD, usually people just talk about the facial features if you know about it, and most don't. And so oftentimes what can happen is it's getting missed all the time because only people think about facial features when there's a lot of other things going on. Next slide. Oh, and by the way, if you have any questions or if I'm talking too quick, just stop me because sometimes I talk really fast. So the other thing, though, that's important with the FASD is that it is really prevalent. It is especially, so there is some research going on. It's about 5% of the population. But really what it's looking at is there's some research going on where they did a study of first grade classrooms. And they did a study throughout the whole entire country, small towns, large towns, whatever. And what they found was that the prevalence of when they really researched and found out about the confirmed alcohol exposure, did all this testing, they found out that the prevalence of FASD is 1 in 20. So if you think about that, in every first grade classroom, there's at least one individual with FASD. Keep in mind, with autism, it's 1 in 44. So this is 1 in 20. And so what's important about this is in this study, the number ended up being 222 kids that actually met the criteria for FASD. How many kids do you feel had the diagnosis before this study happened? How many? 2. So 2 out of 222 kids met the criteria, had the diagnosis before. The rest did not. So if you think about that, it's happening a lot more than what's going on. And what it means is that many of you have come across someone who has FASD that you didn't know, and if you did know, you didn't know what to do with it. And if you think about it, and this is the same thing, I'll get into also just drug exposed as well, but if you think about it, how many services are available for FASD? Does anyone know of any services for FASD? Now you do with the clinic. But other than that, there's nothing else. There's not, but there's a lot for all these other disabilities. So what ends up happening is it becomes this invisible disability because they look like you and I, but they're struggling. Next slide. Next slide. I already kind of went in that. And then looking into foster care, now there's some data, it's kind of all over the place, but it's anywhere between like 35 to 70% within the foster care system. It's not shocking because at least half of, like I was just doing some research of the number of the kids that are getting removed. More, like 60% is because of parents that have been using substances, both drugs and alcohol. So it's not shocking that it's a higher prevalence here. But what's important about this is I'm imagining how many kids here have the diagnosis, how many of your kids here have the diagnosis of FASD? Probably not 70%, I'm assuming, in this room. And it's probably because we're not always thinking about that. Next slide. But the reality is, what's even harder of what these kiddos are dealing with is it's not just alcohol. They're dealing with, you know, caffeine, psychostimulants, tobacco, opioids, cannabinoids, heroin. I mean, the story can go on and on. So the polysubstance use gets even more confusing because it's alcohol built onto something else, and we're also including trauma. Next slide. I'm not going to get into the details of it. And I think about this. So there's other additional risk factors. So not only are the kids being exposed to alcohol and drugs, but you think about it, how much they're getting, how much they're using. Are they using throughout the whole entire pregnancy? Obviously, that's worse for the brain. What's the nutrition? If it's a poor nutrition, are they not having any prenatal care? So if I just if you could think about your kids, of like how many of your kids had the mother had no prenatal care? How many of your, genetics? What happened during the pregnancy of trauma? Like, was it a really stressful pregnancy? Was mom homeless? Was she working as a prostitute? Was she in prison? All of these things impact what's going on in utero. And then what happens is what happens after. And so, it could be physical abuse, sexual abuse, the list can go on and on. But what's crazy about this is that a child can get exposed to all of this, but they still look like you and I. And what ends up happening is we expect them to act like you and I. And, you look at this and go, of course their brain is going to be different. They had a lot they had to deal with. But somehow our brain plays this trick on us and we forget. So that's what we're going to kind of go into. Next slide. Because the bottom line is, what gets super confusing and what I've realized is, like, how many of our kiddos have like 5, 6, 7 diagnoses? Does anyone have any kids with lots of no one knows what do you do with this? I have families going to me like, well, I don't know if it's the ODD, it's the ADHD, is it the DMDD, is it the FASD? And I'm like, who knows? And I think the more diagnosis sometimes gets more confusing, because the bottom line is oftentimes it's everything they're experiencing all at once. And we can't separate out, is it the alcohol? Is it the drugs? Is it this? Is it that? I have no idea. We're dealing with it all together. Next slide. So we're going to take some time to think about our good old friend, the brain. So I need a volunteer. And now you guys are my backup volunteers. If you I already was like trying to get someone to talk for me. Does anyone want to volunteer? Yay. Okay, next slide. You get to stay here. This is easy, though. So if you can, and what is your name? Rebecca? Okay, I'm going to write that down. So if you can tell me, tell me the steps your brain took from the time your children got home from school. Do you have children in school right now? You stepchildren from school. Okay, so tell me what you did, and they live with you? Do they live with you today? So I'm going to change it up. So tell me what your brain had to do from 3 o'clock till the time you got here. Tell me the steps. Just and you could just tell me like I did this, I did this, I did this, I did this. Yeah. Sure.
We have a Great Dane. Yes, had to make sure the dog was taken care of. Had to make a very early dinner. Had to prep for a potential Zoom call. That did not happen. Had to explain to a brand new neighbor all the things about HOA and stuff in our community. Had to pick up stepchild and take to theater practice. Had to plug in to MapQuest how to get here. Had to explain why we're late. And then find friends to sit with.
So first of all, let's give a round of applause for Rebecca. And not only for Rebecca, but for Rebecca's brain. Let's give a round of applause. Because let me tell you what Rebecca did today from 3 on. I mean, so first of all, you were able to. So, first of all, is the routine different today than other days? So, which is amazing in itself. So, Rebecca's brain was able to kind of adapt and kind of problem solve of the schedule kind of changing. So, she needed to figure out how to make dinner earlier, getting the dog. She knew exactly, like, more or less, she was able to take care of herself and her dog, and she remembered all the steps she needed to do to go to take care of her dog. She was able to find a place and come back home and remember this. And you know more or less how long it takes to walk the dog, because you know it's like, how long does it take? You know, and you know exactly what 15 minutes is. And so you know when to come back because you know how to read, you know how to look at your clock, you know you have a general sense of it, which is amazing. She's able to change the dinner time and probably maybe even read a recipe or remember the recipe to make dinner. You know, like also like portions and all of that stuff. You prepped for, but you knew the steps to prep for a potential Zoom call and were able to deal with the disappointment that it did not disappointment. You were able to deal with the whatever kind of feelings you had of it not happening. You probably were excited. I don't know. You had to have the verbal skills to be able to not only to explain to your neighbor about it, the HOA. You also needed to understand what an HOA is and all the stuff that's involved in it. You had once again, you're multitasking, trying to figure out this time thing to pick up your child, your stepchild. You had to understand how to work MapQuest. You needed to find, you have friends. You were able to you were able to find your friends, talk to your friends. Like, that's amazing. And you were also to be able to verbalize why you were late. And you were able to also have that self-regulation to be able to be late, and it won't disrupt you. And so if you think about this for just a moment, what would happen if Rebecca ended up having issues with time? And she wasn't really great with time. She didn't even understand the concept of time because it's really abstract. And so 15 minutes to her might be 45 minutes. How would that impact her day today? Would Rebecca get here on time? Well, she didn't get on time already, but you would have been much later. And what if you would not get here? What if, like, Rebecca also, like, had difficulty with, like she might have missed a step in making dinner and actually the dinner burned, or it was really gross and then the kids ended up hating it? What would happen? Like, how would she be interacting with the world? They'd be yelling at her. She'd be getting more dysregulated. So not only, just think about the whole day. Rebecca's 45 minutes walking the dog. She gets in. She missed something with cooking, and it also takes longer. She's getting more dysregulated. She's late to prepping for this potential Zoom call, and I don't even know what kind of consequence that would have been. Like, it was good that you knew it happened before. The neighbor may never know about this HOA, and I don't know if you have a role in the HOA, but maybe we'll never know about it. That you're going to be late picking up your stepdaughter. You're lost here because you don't have good spatial visual spatial areas to be able to get here. You don't have friends because you have no social pragmatics, and and you are left. How do you think? Not only, first of all, I'm imagining Rebecca would feel really anxious, really lonely, and really struggling, and just having all these other things that are happening. But also, how would we see Rebecca? Because going back to Rebecca looks just like you and I. We're like, oh, she's so annoying. She's so like, God, don't you know how to cook? Gosh, it's only 15 minutes. Just look at your time. Just look at your watch. This is what we'd be dealing with Rebecca, and we would get frustrated with Rebecca, and then Rebecca gets more frustrated with herself. Does that make sense? So sometimes when we talk, and I always bring the brain into this to this activity, because sometimes what we do seems like it's not remarkable, and then we kind of take it for granted, when the reality is what we do, our brain, what we're doing is amazing. Like, everything that Rebecca did is amazing. And the fact that she can come in and just still do jokes and be fine. But a lot of our kiddos can't. And so you think about those steps that we're missing for them. Any questions? And you guys can hear me, right? Next slide. So I'm going to kind of go over, and this is primary characteristics of FASD, but I didn't really delve into this as much. Keep in mind, alcohol is, so first of all, there's probably 3 different camps. There's kids we know that have been exposed to alcohol. There's kids that will never know they've been exposed to alcohol because we're not good at screening it. It comes in and out of the body really quick. We may never know about the alcohol. And those kids that are maybe just been exposed to drugs or trauma. But so I say FASD, I'm just looking at primary characteristics of whatever happened to them, because the challenge of a lot of these kiddos is there's so many unknowns, so we have to guess what they've been exposed to, and that's what's so hard when you just don't have that information. So one of the things we look at is the developmental level of functioning, and we like to talk about this as developmental dysmaturity. And we talk about act like age versus actual age. So going back to Rebecca, she looks like, I don't know how old you are. We're just going to say you're 25. But maybe her act like age is 9, which there are a lot of 25-year-olds that maybe are act like age of 9. So it's really about and so I want you to think about maybe one of your kiddos that you're raising right now, that do they feel more comfortable with younger friends? Are they playing with younger, are they playing with toys that are for younger kids? Do you see them just really much younger than their stated age? And why can this be a challenge, and why could this be a potential area of problem? So I'm going to give a couple of examples where this causes so many issues. So a lot of times there's these kiddos that actually, they talk better than they really are. So they talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk. And so once again, because they talk the talk, they don't walk the walk, our mind plays that crazy trick on us to say they look normal, they should do better. And so I think of a child who, he went through our clinic. He was 12 years old. He actually had been Baker acted, well, it's like 20 times. He had been Baker acted a number of times. He sure talked like a teenager. But what was interesting during that clinic time, he actually was needing to transition for the different testing, and he needed a stuffed animal to transition from each of those different places. And so we started talking to this mom about act like age, that maybe even though he seems like a tough teenager, he's actually much younger. And then all of a sudden she started thinking about this time when he was 5, where he's now a big boy, and he had a favorite stuffed animal that mom started putting away because that's big boys don't play with stuffed animals anymore. They're ready to go to the next level. But he wasn't ready to go to the next level, and mom didn't realize it because he looked like you and I. And so what happened was then he was at 5 or 6, and now he had to learn how to figure out himself by himself. He was needing to learn coping mechanisms. He was needing to learn all this stuff, but he couldn't. He still was a much younger child. I think of another parent I was just talking to just a couple of weeks ago, 3 years old. No, he's 4 years old. And she talked about, she's like, he cannot go to a play date. I don't know what's wrong. He can't go to a play date. And so I'm like, well, really, how old is he? What is his act like age? And she's like a 2-year-old. And I'm like, well, would you have a 2-year-old go on a play date on his own and just let him play by themselves? Probably not. And he probably would be doing more parallel play. So when this keeps on coming up of what is their age? Any questions? Can anyone relate to this? Anyone have a good example of this? Oh my gosh, nothing. Myrna. I'm not gonna. For some reason, I have a feeling this group is an expert of sensory stuff. But still, that's another primary characteristic that we look at, and how so many times what happens when your sensory system is out of loop, but we create an environment that sets them up for failure, is like, how do we organize our house? And so I have an example. I don't have the picture here, which I probably should have a better PowerPoint for this. But there was a mom who really wanted to do something special for her daughter, and she decorated the room. There were flowers. It was like flowers everywhere. There was things everywhere. It was like a sensory overload. And what do you think this child? So going back to this mom, who her intentions were totally there for her, but the room was just the worst thing out there for her. I think of so many like therapy rooms. I always talk. Sorry, going back to, because I'm a therapist, that there's toys everywhere, and then they're like, well, why is this kid really misbehaving? I'm like, have you seen this room? It's a sensory overload. And so it's just always important, and it's something that I want you guys to be thinking about. What is my house like? Is everything out? Because some kids can handle having things out, some kids cannot. I'm going to get into not all of them, but language and communication. So going back to a lot of these kids, expressive language is much better than receptive language. So what that means is they can talk. They can talk and act like they know whatever they need to do. And that's the mind plays that trick on us. But they may not. And so if you might go to them like, well, what does that mean? And you delve into it a little bit more, they may not have any idea of what you're talking about. And so a lot of times with this language and communication, and also that gets into social pragmatics. So social pragmatics is they may know language, but do they know how to use language? And so oftentimes they may not be able to use language. They may not know how to, in the day-to-day life, like they're not like Rebecca, who can find a table and her friends and figure out like how to work together. They don't know how to do that. They don't know how to read somebody else's social cues. They don't know all that subtle things of like, how do I maneuver language when it's really abstract? Because you think about social relationships, how abstract it can be. It's so complicated. And I could think of just another example. I have so many examples, but like of where problems can go awry. So another example, abstract language. So it was a foster adoptive family, and the father, he is really wanted, he's a great foster father, but the reality is how he's always connected with people is through sarcasm. We live in sarcasm, like that's kind of how we do it. That was his sense of humor. Well, this poor boy who was 12 years old, took everything he said at face value, and it created such issues between that dyad, because here the father was trying to connect. This kid couldn't understand a word he said, so then the child started yelling at him. Then the father started yelling at him because he was yelling at him, and it escalated into something so big, when the reality is this father was trying to connect, but this child never understood what he was trying to say. And so sometimes we talk oftentimes in a very abstract way. Even something like clean your room or be a good boy or do good. What in the world does that mean? And so it's all these times when we talk about language, how we are communicating language. Is it clear? Is it really concrete? It oftentimes not. And I think of like feelings. That can be so complicated, and problem solving can be so complicated. And that can cause so many issues because these kids really are struggling with language. And I go back to the social pragmatics, like, when they're younger, the rules are pretty simple, like share. I mean, not that simple, but it's a little simpler than now. It's like, because social rules change so much. Like, we know the subtleties of, like, I know, like, that seat, probably someone's not going to sit there because my thing is there. But at the same time, I can have a friend of mine just take the seat and I know it's okay. So it's like, I know that little rule of, like, that's going to be fine. So it would be, if a stranger took my chair right now, that would be weird. But if a friend took that seat, it wouldn't be weird. But if somebody is really concrete and doesn't know those abstract rules of social language, that can be really dysregulating and really confusing. And if anyone has any examples, would love to hear. Processing pace. So these kiddos a lot of times are 10-second kids living in a 3-second world, if not a 1-second world. We give a command, you need to respond right away. And the reality is, this is a hard one for us more so than these kids, because we expect them to respond right away. What do? They sometimes just respond right away and just say whatever they think we need them to say, even if they have no idea what they're saying, because they need this extra time to process what's going on. And it's probably really hard for us, because you know what that means? We might need to sit in silence for a couple of seconds to have you process it. So, I mean, I'll go like this because I get uncomfortable always. I'm like wanting everyone to talk. And if someone doesn't respond right away, I'm always like, okay, I'm going on to the next one, because I get anxious with the silence. But sometimes you could just sit with silence, and how does that feel? And it's awkward for us, but what if our kiddos need that and we're not giving it to them? And just out of curiosity, once again, is anyone relating to any of this? I would love an example. You get some good deeds. You could just cross it off your list if anyone has an example, because that makes this more meaningful. Woo!
Okay, so not even like from an FASD perspective, but just from a respect perspective, because we have teenagers in the house now, and so one recently, it's been a few months, they said, we don't like it when you come in the door and just tell us what to do, and so I'm thinking, like, well, if you were supposed to have the laundry done, and like you leave the checklist, does anybody else do that? You're like, by the time I get back, and it's like not done. And so I'm walking in and I'm like, well, that's frustrating to me that you haven't done those things. But really, they just want me to say hi and how are you, which was like a big adjustment for me. But it's kind of that timing piece too of, can we have a moment of like a greeting, and then I'll say like, hey, remember I left the list, and they just need a few minutes and then they'll get around to it. But if I come in the door and that's the first thing I say, it's met with a lot more resistance. So it's frustrating to me, but it's an accommodation that I've started to make, and it's made for a more peaceful house.
And one thing important that you just said, this is not just an FASD thing. This is a human thing. And so that's why at the very beginning I said, do what your brain needs in order to focus. Because the reality is, anyone, we all come in with our own brain-based challenges. And so the practice is starting to observe and reflect and understand that we all need to be making accommodations for everyone to some extent. And I really think, going back to what you're saying, it's like, did the stuff get done? Yes. And there's some kiddos that their brain is working really hard at school, because there's a lot of kiddos who they go to school and then they come home and that's when you see all the behaviors. And there's some of these kids that they need to come home, they can't even talk to you. I mean, going back to processing pace, they just need to go in their room for a half hour because their brain needs to decompress. And by us talking is going to cause more problems. And so I still go back to Rebecca. If let's just say Rebecca is coming in late and really dysregulated, and then everyone's like, Rebecca, where were you? Tell me what's going on. She's going to get more agitated. So it's about giving that space to give them that space. It's okay to be sitting in silence. Have it become your friend. Of course. Oh my God, I'm loving it.
Guys, I have so many examples. Okay. So again, we had a 15-year-old. She went to the beach last night. She was supposed to be home at 8:30. Was not home at 8:30. Was home at 9:30. Came in, was obviously dysregulated. I let her just go to bed. But then today, when she was in a better space, it was, hey, let's talk about, what happened yesterday. And so then I was able, it's okay. Do you have an example too? So today, she came home from school, she got a snack, we were in a better place. And so then it was, can I have my phone? Well, let's talk about last night. So then we talked about last night. And then the consequence is still, you're not going to do anything this weekend with friends and you can't have your phone. But I'm glad we talked about this. But if I had tried to say that last night when she was already probably nervous that she was late and going to get in trouble, and then had a bad social experience, which is what I found out today. So it ended up being a point of connection about why she was mad last night. The consequence still happened, but it just didn't happen last night. It was just like, it's 9:30, go to bed. And that was okay.
Such wonderful examples. Because the other thing that you're bringing up, so there could be a kiddo that struggles with processing pace, that's the processing speed, that is their issue, but it is worse when you're dysregulated. So they're not listening to anything you're saying when they're dysregulated. And it just makes me think of another example of a child that came home late. It was, this child had struggles of even trying to find his way home. It was a hailstorm, and he got in. The dad started screaming at him, and so what did the kid do? And he's got major sensory issues. He started screaming at him. He hit the dad, and all of a sudden it became something bigger. And so it's important to, and I'm giving these examples because going back to human nature, they look just like you and I, and they should be following the rules. But when we start thinking about that processing pace and thinking about it's worse when they're dysregulated and they're dealing with sensory issues on top of it, the goal is to get back to where you are at. Learning and memory. I mean, I don't know how many times I've heard, I know they know better because they did it yesterday. Why aren't they doing it today? And for some reason, the answer to that seems to always be because they did it yesterday, they did it today, they're not doing it today. We seem to think that maybe they're just lazy and they're not trying hard enough, rather than thinking about their brain. That has this ever happened with you guys where you have some days your brain is working better than others? And so if it's happening with us, can you imagine if your brain was exposed to alcohol, drugs, trauma? It's probably happening a lot more. But we still do that crazy thing with our brain going, they did it yesterday, they should do it today. And the reality is, it's like sometimes it's flicker, that light bulb is really bright, sometimes it's flickering, and sometimes it's not working at all. Oh, wait, 1 second. No, because they need to, wherever they are, they need to hear you.
So, what if your child is like 13 now? You've had them not their whole life, but a good portion. They've been through therapy. What do you do if this is still affecting them now? And how do you know? Because, yeah, I'm butting heads with a 13-year-old girl, and I don't know if it's her or me. So.
Well, super wonderful question about the older child, because what can happen is it's actually a little, well, there's different challenges for the younger kids than the older children, because the younger kids, they're more dysregulated, there's other issues. The problem that kicks in with the older children is going back to that expectation. So they're 13 years old, they should know better. But the problem is, and they talk better, but the 13-year-old, we don't know what is their act like age. Are they 13? Is she 13? Right, so what is her act like age? So, okay, so if you are right, exactly, that's the point. And so there could be some areas that she could be dealing with that she could be like a 2-year-old. Or she could be like a 5-year-old, but we're treating her like a 13-year-old. And it's annoying because we're like, we already went through this. And the other thing that kicks in, if you, like for the women in the room, going back to our brains are working even worse when we started going through puberty and menstruating and hormones going on. Your brain is definitely not working to the best of its ability at that time. And you're dealing with, you think about all the different things that your brain is needing to add, like what we're asking out of a 13-year-old that we weren't asking out of a 5-year-old. We're asking of a 13-year-old, first of all, you think about, oh man, do they need to, I mean, first of all, if she's a 13-year-old, but she's really like a 5-year-old and she has to have 13-year-old friends, how complicated that is. Is she needing to, dealing with a period and how much you have to deal with your brain on that and the steps. Like, I've had sessions and sessions and sessions just on that, because what we need to ask of your brain is a lot for that. You have to deal with the social pragmatics. It's at a whole other level at 13. You're dealing with moving classes and those transitions. So if you were a child that had struggles with transitions, and now you're expected to be moving classes, you're expected to, I mean, you're going into high school and even more independence. There's a lot we're expecting out of them, but they're right here. And so, and it still goes back to our mind plays bigger tricks on us the older they get. And I do wonder of part of what we want to do, even with this training, is, and I don't even have the time. Will you be my timekeeper? Huh? 7:24. Okay. That you could, like, one is really starting to learn to observe. And so some of the questions I'm asking, start thinking about. I'm a big person, like I go back to the FASD clinic, but even getting neuropsych testing, because there might be some things going on in terms of other areas like, well, learning and memory, that they might have difficulty with memory. And so there's some kids that, like, they can tell you something long term, but they can't remember a 2-step command. But we expect them to remember a 2-step command, and then they don't, and then we're like, you're 13, what's wrong with you? You should know a 2-step command. I already told you that.
So this is something that I had to learn with one of our kiddos, because go clean your room.
and the room was never clean. But then even when I would give him multiple tasks like pick up your shoes and your clothes and make your bed, I would go check on him and those things weren't done, but he just could not remember each task, and then he would get sidetracked on one, like making the bed, and then he was playing with his pillows. And so and this is an everyday thing with him, just the motor planning and things like that just are not as easy for him. So for his bedroom, for instance, one task, he comes back and then praise him for completing that task, send him back for one more, and then his room's done. It's not that he didn't want to clean it, it's just he couldn't remember.
And then I would say, so an adjustment we've made with childcare at the gathering even is putting pictures, because the kids want to know about like what the transitions are and what they're doing. And so it's like a slice of pizza, a swing set, a board game. So they know we're eating, we're going to the playground, we're playing in the classroom. So like what you were saying about processing information differently too. So pictures can help. But going back to the 13-year-old and the 5-year-old body, I think what makes that super complicated is the 13-year-old and the 5-year-old body has 13-year-old friends who have cell phones, who have social media. So they have 13-year-old privileges too. And one of the things that we've had to really figure out is if so you are 13 or 15, but you're acting this age, but you want this privilege, which is a this age privilege. And so, how do I, for example, like if you're 15 and you can't get up on time in the morning, but you want to get a job. So we've started to connect that. Hey, let's try, if you can start taking care of yourself in the morning by waking up, then maybe you can have that extra responsibility and privilege of getting a job. If you can do this, then we can start to talk about getting our permit. But it's got it, and for us, that helps us figure out how much they have control of versus how much is a developmental or like a trauma-related issue, because they're motivated towards those things. They want the phone or the license or the whatever, and so it's like you almost have to, in our case at least, have to make some connections there that motivate them to want to do those milestone things.
And though it might be in order for them to get that job, I still go back to we need to start observing where the brain is at. So if they're they have problems with executive functioning, planning, organizing, whatever it may be, we have to just know where they're at. And so I think about another child. He was 16 years old. He wanted a job. And there was a lot, what we did before he got the job was really talking about his brain and how his brain works, and thinking about like, does he get easily distracted? What happens when he has a lot of when there's a lot of noises? Like we sometimes talk about him having like Vulcan ears because he can hear all the way over there. And so that comes up all the time. What about, so we have to think about those kinds of jobs. And so what happened was with this kid, we thought of a perfect job for him, and the mother ended up talking to the boss and really was supporting him, and the child understood how his brain worked. But what happened was, unfortunately, with this job, it ended up being really hard for him. He was working at Five Below, and what happens is he was just putting away all the all the things, and so you go like this and this and this and this. Well, he got ADHD and he's really distracted. So he wanted to do such a good job, but then he'd be putting something away, he got distracted and completely forgot where he was. He wanted the job, he really wanted the job, but that job ended up being so hard for him and he couldn't do the job. And I can give another example of another child who where jobs work and didn't work. There was another kid, he was 17 too. He did great at Subway because he has memory issues and things like that. But what happened with Subway was that, when you do the order on the sandwich, I'll have lettuce, I'll have tomatoes, I'll have this. He did fine. And it was like a step by step. Get him into Burger King, forget about it. It was an impossible possible job. So it's really important to really assess where their brain is working, because that's where, like, I think of going back to the kid of Five Below, he's probably going to be better at a job where it's really quiet, because having a really loud job, he's not going to make it in that job. So I think the getting back to, what do we do, is start noticing, start paying attention. And I think going back to our muscle memory of, like, they should know better. What's going on? I'm tired. That if you could just, easier said than done. I know I'm saying this is easier said than done, but even if it's like you have somebody else come in and start observing, like when you say things differently, when you start doing one command at a time versus 3 commands at a time, see if it's different. See if there's something different of you're talking in a quieter space with less things around versus another space. What would it feel like if, like, let's just say for them doing their chores, you actually just tell them what to do rather than just expecting them to do it and then getting into a fight? What would it be if you think about, like, that 13-year-old and she wants to go out with her friends, and maybe she doesn't go out with her friends. Maybe the friends come over to the house so that you can be monitoring. And so it's like you just need to, like, figure out what kind of child you're working, or what kind of child do we have, in really assessing the brain, and not get into the behaviors. Because if you could do the next slide, I think it's here. Because what happens when primary characteristics go unrecognized is that secondary symptoms end up happening. And so what ends up happening is this poor fit that I keep on talking about, where here's a 13-year-old, but she's really like a 5-year-old, but I'm expecting her to be a 13-year-old. And then these defensive patterns start kicking in. And then they start where we're expecting more than what they can do. And I'll give another really wonderful example. There was this child who had trouble with, like, visual spatial issues. And so somehow when they're looking in the room, they were just looking at here. The mom goes, "Hey, will you sweep up the room?" Well, he sweeps up the room. He sweeps up here. The mom comes in and goes, "You didn't sweep up the room. Look at this room." He starts getting annoyed. He gets mad. He starts yelling at her. She yells at him. Explosion. And so if you can imagine, if mom didn't, because mom didn't know about this, that problems kept on going on all the time. And so what happens is he gets more frustrated. He gets, it's even going back to the Rebecca thing. If she was late and dysregulated and all that stuff, she would have been anxious, lonely, shut down, fearful. That's what happens when we don't see that primary characteristics and we start going into the secondary thing. This is human nature. This is not an FASD thing. This is human nature. When someone expects something like this for us and we're down here. And I'm not saying that we can't bring somebody up, but we need to make it in a place that's realistic. Next slide. And this is what they end up experiencing from a really young age, and not because no one had, like, the intention of the adults around them isn't bad. Like, they want to help, but our mind plays this crazy game on us. And so this is what ends up they're experiencing. Next slide. We're going to go to the next slide. We'll do that with her. We'll have a couple minutes with that. Next slide. Next slide. And so really, one thing before we get into the small group activity is really looking at what are the treatments, because that's another issue that kicks in with these kiddos. They start having behaviors, and so now all of a sudden treatment is all about the behaviors. It's all about the secondary characteristics. And so if we have a child that's really dysregulated with anger management, he might be going to a therapist dealing with anger management classes or learning coping skills, but he doesn't even remember them. And so, and then the caregiver is not involved and not understanding the primary characteristics. So oftentimes these treatments may not even work because we're not looking at the root of what's going on and where those brain-based challenges are. If that makes sense. And so there's so many things that we want to look at. Are we dealing with in treatment, are we dealing with the primary? Or are we dealing with the secondary? And we always talk in the FASD world, but the reality is I talk about this in the world. This has now become my mantra, is really the goal of life is not independence. The goal of life is interdependence. We want them to be as independent as they want with the help of somebody else and to be able to ask for help. Because the reality is, us coming together is so much better than me being independent and Kimberly being independent. And so that's really the goal with that. So even with treatment, the more that you guys are aware of what those brain-based challenges are, the better it will be. Any questions before we do? We have how many minutes for the small group? Perfect. So now for those that are not here, I don't know where you are because I can't see you guys. You're going to go on to Zoom and use your Zoom link. We're going to be breaking up into small groups. And so you'll see 2 individuals. And you could just pick one, or if we have time, you could pick both. There's Robert, who's 6 years old, and there's Matthew, who's 16. And you'll notice where both of them, they have different ages for different things that they're dealing with. So I'm going to have you guys just do the small group conversation, share and talk about Robert and Matthew, and then we'll come back together. So you guys can show both that. And if anyone needs a pen, does everyone have pens? And does everyone have a group? There should be this one. So these questions are about Robert. So you get to meet Robert, and Robert is a 6-year-old boy who talks like an 8-year-old, who's fantastic at sports at 10 years old. Like his day-to-day functioning is like a 4-year-old. Social skills is like a 4-year-old, and how he like comprehension and social maturity is more of like a 3-year-old. And so that would be the same thing with Matthew. So you can focus first on Robert. Just think of him. So do you get the activity? Right. And he's a 16-year-old. No. Oh, yeah. It's like and that's the problem. It's like the part of this is like, how do we make this invisible disability visible? Because no one's seeing this as a visible disability. No one's believing it. It's like we live, it's so ingrained in our society to be independent. It's purpose, like we want people, like I just think of, not to get into a whole thing, but like the prison system. We live in a society where in order for you to change, you need to feel shame, you need to feel bad, and that's the only way for us to learn and to make changes. When the reality is, people are making bad decisions for so many different reasons. And how do we start seeing the humanity of, like, especially these kiddos that have gone through so much? I'm not not saying like no to prison, but it's still like it's really it's a complex. It's ingrained of this.
Teachers know that there's so many relatives out there, but yet they act like that they're not traumatized.
But you know, I always think now through where people are at, and teachers, unfortunately, because of the stress, they're not at their cognitive best. Like I feel like the level we're never good when we're stressed. And all I can tell you is when I worked at a school, I have never been so stressed in my life. And you don't think clearly. And they have to like, and you're just needing the problem to go away. And so it's really hard, I think, just the system that we're in right now, too. I mean, I think there's some like, come on, let's just think about it. But some are like, this is too big to handle. Please, let's just go away because they're dealing with lots of trauma
My
kids.
my one, who's 13, who's just over her period, I got called and I said she's getting ready for her second period. I said, what affects her? My other girls, it didn't, but for her it does. And then she's like, yeah, why? And guess what? That afternoon I got called from her family. So I texted the teacher back and I said, guess what? That's what I said.
Mm-hmm.
But mine are instead of they do the fight, flight, and freeze. Mine freezes,
Mm-hmm.
and it drives them nuts. When they say do something, and she just sits there and won't do it,
Mm-hmm.
and it drives them nuts because.
What's her processing pace? Has she been tested for like her IQ and stuff?
No. Like she was like on honor society and this and that until one day she came home and said, "You know what? I don't want to go to those meetings. You know, will they do anything at those meetings? All they do is talk about raising money." She said they don't do anything, so she didn't want to be on honor society anymore. I mean, it's just it's craziness.
It's yeah, it's really
But she's very black and white too. So, but the way that you said that, it's like I've come here a long time,
yeah.
and what you said today is like I feel like that's my world because I looked at her and like, oh my god, because you say you know, they're a 13-year-old body with hair coming off their forehead.
And then and it's worse when we start yelling at them because they're not 13. It just makes them even less.
But yesterday they were 13, and
Yeah.
so you're thinking, okay, well yesterday they were 13, why aren't they 13
Yeah.
today? Even though when you say that in the secondary things, it's the first time I've ever really heard it put that way,
Mm-hmm.
and that makes a lot of sense.
I feel like I have to be honest. This has been life changing. Like I'm going on the road with this because it really, and I not only just like with these kiddos, like with the world, because it's like, what are we dealing with? And we all have our brain based challenges. And how do we start respecting? Like I think about myself of how I learn and how I was forced to learn and how it made me feel. And now I'm like, I'm so much kinder to myself knowing how what I need to learn. And so it's like, it's really like, how do we start talking to each other in a different way?
My
In
brother
ourselves.
was left-handed, and he was learned, of course, to have his arm kind
Yeah.
of behind his back so he would write with his other hand.
Yeah.
I mean, back in the olden days. I mean, they don't do that anymore, but they do other stuff that's not
Yeah.
the greatest either.
Yeah. But it's the same thing. And it's coming from ignorance, not in a mean ignorance, but it's like, how do we start looking at it differently? And
Well, she wouldn't do a test one day, so they called me and said she refuses to do the test. And I said, I mean, if she doesn't take the test, and they were sitting there, guess what? That isn't going to work with her.
no, and if she's anxious and then like,
Like I've got two friends that work at the Florida Center, Gina Carey,
oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. I love
and
Gina.
Lori Walsh.
Oh, of course. Well, they're two of my favorite people.
Lori and I worked together for years. She worked with preschool teachers together.
I didn't know that Lori was a, she would be such a good preschool teacher.
Now she's a therapist, right?
Lori, oh, then maybe I'm talking to the different Lori.
Oh, she goes between.
Oh, I'm talking to a
local-
different Lori. But Gina, I know.
Yeah.
I don't know if I know the other Lori. Lori, then the one
And
I know.
Susan Carney,
Yeah,
Eckel,
but
whatever.
she's now leaving.
Yes, I worked with her at 40 Carrots years and years.
Oh, okay.
And Gina was there, and Lori was
But
there.
Gina now is working the front desk.
Yes. And what about Nestor? Is she still there?
Carol Nestor?
Uh-huh.
No,
No.
no, but I do love Carol.
Yeah, I like Carol.
Yeah, because Carol comes to the, yeah, I love Carol. Yes. Are you are you guys doing the homework? Well, maybe you were supposed to be the star student for me. We already set the stage. Done and done. I mean, your brain is, let's be honest, your brain is not working to the best of its ability anymore. It's at 8 o'clock. Yeah, I totally got it. I do. This is an accommodation I have to make for you, for your brain. Are you guys ready? Let's end the night. All right. So I don't know if the people back over there in Zoom, I don't even know where they are now. Um, so can anyone share the story? And okay, raise your hand if you did the home. Well, that you guys did one. Did anyone do any? Did the other? Did you guys do a discussion? Or were you guys just chit chatting? It's okay if you were just chit chatting, but someone did Robert. You guys, okay, so who can share what you guys talked about at the table? Okay, you guys have to, though.
So we definitely. Okay, go. So we basically talked about how especially he's a boy, right, and he's like big and strong, and a lot of me as a man at least, I think that when you see that tall, big, strong guy, that's kind of all you need, especially in those kind of ages. Um, so we definitely thought it was going to be some trouble, especially with his mental age being a little bit down, and he might say something that doesn't sound, you know, too great or make sense or whatever. Somebody makes the wrong comment, and it might turn even physical. We thought, maybe violent at that point, but um, definitely when it comes to expectations from him, nobody will expect him anything else. He's just a big, very athletic and expressive, 6-year-old. So that's where I think the challenge really comes. Because who knows? Like you said, who knows? How do you know?
Well, let's give a round of applause. Yeah, and you think about poor little Robert. I mean, so going back to it's Robert, right? Yeah, okay. It's like he's really athletic and everyone's just all he's doing is he talks great, he's really athletic. They think he's doing great, but he might be getting kicked off of the team because he doesn't have any social skills, the poor little guy. He's getting in trouble at school. He's really struggling, but they think he could do a lot more. So that's little Robert. Did anyone do the second one of Matthew? Might as well. I mean, look at not only was having everything that Rebecca's brain did from 3 to now, and they did Matthew. I mean, seriously. And she wrote everything. This brain is on fire.
Okay, so for Matthew, we said similarly that because his physical and his language were so high that of course people would assume things about him that just weren't true. The second question about should he be a babysitter, absolutely not, because the maturity level was way down here at a 6, and you would never ask a 6-year-old to babysit. And he also doesn't have a good concept of time or responsibility with living and things like that. We did not get to the last question, but they had some great ideas for support systems. So maybe some of the pros here could talk about what kind of accommodations to help Matthew. What kind of accommodations could be made to help him interact with kids his own age?
Well, we've more talked about the problems, but um, with Robert, like he was younger, so I thought having some intervention and supervision would be really helpful. Like kind of even coaching along, we need to take turns, we need to think about other people's feelings too. But the thing that got me is that, with Matthew being 16, and I've had 2 teenagers so far that I adopted that when they got to their teenage years, they were so developmentally and emotionally younger that it really became hard for them in any kind of social group with their peers. And the older they get, the less able a parent is to intervene or to be involved, um, and they start, rather than being looked at as someone who needs help, they start being looked at as, oh, there's that troublemaker, you know. And so with one of my daughter's cases, she just really tuned out. Like, she would go to youth group and she'd have her headset on and she just wouldn't participate because I'd make her be there. And also, they tend to get taken advantage of because other kids see those vulnerabilities. And, for instance, oh, let's have lunch together, but I'm going to take your lunch money, and all kinds of stuff like that happened. And as a parent, you don't you don't have the same type of sway. Like, you can't just go into the school, or you can't be as involved as you were before. So um, I'd like some insight on that.
Well, there's a couple of them. Well, first of all, I still wonder, even with your daughter, of actually her coming here, and she didn't want to come here. Did she not want to come here because she had to be with kids her own age? But I, no, but I'm still wondering. Sorry to go back to the finishing of the sentence, and I'll go back to what you were saying, because I still wonder of actually having the headsets and letting her listen to the music actually could potentially have been an accommodation for her till when she's ready to be out with. So they're also, because I think we also force kids to be social when maybe they don't want to be social, so that actually could have been an accommodation. Just a little side note on that. I mean, but going back to how easily we could not look at it as an accommodation, go, look at her. She's got her headphones on and not even talking to anyone. And then we can create those secondary, not that you would ever have done this if you did do this on purpose at all. This is human nature. But it's like we do this where then all of a sudden it's like she's feeling shamed, she's feeling bad. When the reality is, if we give her permission, if she doesn't want to be with somebody or feels uncomfortable, that's totally fine. And when you're ready. But we push socialness. This is something that we want as a society, when sometimes that just might be difficult. And I do, so going back to babies, so it goes back to, I think, even what Jody's saying, like, how do we get back to connection? So I think when things get so stressful, and this is human nature, so this is not, and I'm giving these simplified answers to really complex problems. But so going back to teenage years, when we're not at our cognitive best, because when they're having big behaviors, they're not at their cognitive best, and we're not at our cognitive best, and then we're just staying at our cognitive worst. And so I always think of like TBRI, getting back to that playful engagement of how do we get back down to get back to building that connection, because that connection is key to be able to create those accommodations for these older kids. And so a playful engagement is like, you know what, can I watch you play this video game? Can I play this video game with you? Can I watch the video game over here? Can I, whatever it is, to get back to that connection. And to realize when you are like so the red flags, I would say, is like when you're at a point where this kid is like being manipulative, this kid is being obnoxious, this kid is destroying my life. If you start having those like narratives going on, which we all do. So I'm looking at you just because you asked the question. I'm not like, no, because we all do. When that happens, that's just the time to take a step back and go, how do I go down to be able to be there for that child? Because that's what they ultimately need. Because going back to, even with the babysitting, if we're not thinking about that child as really a socially, like, is it 6 years old? How old is the child socially? No, but the social skills is about a 7-year-old. We're not thinking that his social skills are 7. we're thinking of, oh, here's this 20-year-old. No, he's 18, isn't he? 16. This 16-year-old who wants to babysit, and I'm going to give him that opportunity because I want to give him more responsibility. And so maybe an accommodation would be, well, first of all, we want to think about what's his act like age, because if not, we're just going to have him babysit this child, and that might be difficult. But maybe babysitting could be like the child comes over, you're there in the house with this with the child as he's babysitting, so you're providing that supportive times. What's the time, by the way? Because I don't know. Are we almost done? Okay, so we're going to be ending very soon. Thank you. So it could be those situations where then you're working up to letting him have a little bit of time to babysit, where first monitoring and then slowly building up the steps. But if you're not noticing the child as younger, if you might set him up for failure before he's able to even do anything. So we've got 4 minutes left, and I'm always a person who likes to end on time. Any questions, or if you do have any questions, I'll be here for a couple of minutes after. But I have to say thank you for participating. I only like to do trainings where people participate, so thank you, especially at 8 o'clock at night. So give your brains a round of applause. So thank you.
Thanks so much for being here. That was great. Okay, so if you have access to email on your phone, if you would go ahead and pull out your phone real quickly. I sent an email since you've been here, probably. And at the very top, it should have a survey link. It's only 3 questions. It's anonymous. And that information really helps us. The community foundations and different grant partners and places like that, they love to know impact. And so we can say 20 people are here. But they would say, so what? What did those 20 people do while they were there? And so we've come up with 3 really easy questions that help us to know whether or not the information that you're getting is useful. So you can just answer those honestly, and then that helps us to gauge how we're doing. So I would really appreciate if you could do that. As far as where to pick your kids up at the end of the night, those of you that have kiddos here, if you have a 2 or 3-year-old, a 4 or a 5-year-old, or a 10 to 13-year-old, they're going to be in this building, okay, in one of our 3 classrooms out these doors. If you have a 7 or an 8-year-old, they're going to be in the kids building right next door. And if you have an 8 or a 9-year-old, they're in the youth building, which is kind of back behind the kids building. You wouldn't have seen it from the parking lot when you pulled in. So when you go grab them later, that hopefully will just help you find them a little bit quicker. Just a reminder real quickly that next month, and so in June and July, we'll be at Oasis Church, and the registration for that should be live within the next few days. So thanks so much for being here. I'm going to close this out in prayer, and then you guys can pick up kiddos and get on with the rest of your night. God, thanks so much for a chance to be together. Thanks for just the way that you made our brains and bodies, and that we can learn about that. And by doing so, we can be better parents. So pray that you help us to just pause this week as we care for kids in our home, that we would be curious and not judgmental, and that you would help us to just be the best parents that you've called us to be. Please keep everybody safe as they go home tonight. Thank you so much for our families. Amen.